Well, we're back into our series called Unsung Heroes, and our next unsung hero that we're going to be looking at is a man with no name. All we know is his condition. We don't know anything else about him. His story is only found in one place in the Bible, and it's the disciple John that tells us the story about Jesus' encounter with this man. And we're going to pick up the story in John chapter 9. We're going to skip around a little bit in that chapter, and you can read the entire story about this man in John 9. But let's listen to what the disciple John writes right now in John 9:1. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth, he being Jesus. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus. "But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam," which this word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. It's very interesting. This man left home not knowing that he was going to return being able to see. He left home blind and came home seeing. And we can learn some lessons from this man, and there's some principles and lessons I want us to look at in this story. The first one is this: Jesus did his part, but the blind man had to do his part. Jesus chose to use a very unique technique in order to heal this man. Jesus spat on the ground, and with his spit, he made some mud, and he took that mud and packed it on the man's eyes. Well, we wonder, why did Jesus do that? Or you might not wonder. I wonder why did Jesus do that? I mean, he could have done anything. He could have just spoken and the man would have been healed. He could have touched him on the head and the man would have been healed. Anything like that could have happened. But Jesus chose to spit on the ground, make a little mud pack, and put it on the blind man's eyes. So why did Jesus choose to do it that way? Now, we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us why he chose to do it that way, but I have my own thoughts about that. I believe that the blind man had to make a choice to do what Jesus told him to do. You see, the man needed to exercise his faith for the healing to take place. His healing came, and just follow along with this, his healing came after the man went and washed his eyes out where Jesus told him to go wash his eyes out. Jesus did the healing, but the blind man had to do the believing. If he would have just said, "Oh man, that's gross," and just wiped his eyes of the mud that was on his eyes, we would never have heard about this man. Little did the blind man know what was going to happen once he was healed. You would think this would be the best thing that ever happened to someone, and it was the best thing that ever happened to this man, but he was getting ready to face some situations. See, the religious leaders, they questioned this man's healing. This man had never seen anything in his life. John tells us this man was born blind. He had never seen anything in his life, and suddenly now he could see. The religious people who should have been celebrating this miracle from God were not celebrating. They were too busy questioning the former blind man about who healed him to even acknowledge the miracle. You read the whole chapter 9 of John, and you're not going to find one time where these religious leaders acknowledge this miracle. I know the reason that they give for being so upset is because this man was healed on their Sabbath day, their holy day. But I'm not sure that's really the reason for their anger. Maybe they were jealous that they had not been the ones who did the healing. They didn't have that kind of power. Maybe they felt their position and their power and their authority were being threatened by someone who could do something that they couldn't do. Maybe they were afraid that they would lose their influence among the people that were under them and around them. And honestly, maybe they were just mean. I mean, let's be real. Maybe they were just mean, angry people who were not happy when anything good happened to anybody else. I don't know what their real problem was, but I believe that these religious people were really the real blind people. Oh, they could see physically, but I believe they were blinded spiritually. They failed to see how God had performed a miracle in their midst. And instead of rejoicing, they were out to punish the one God used to perform this miracle. That blows my mind. See, they thought they could find a way to justify their anger. And we pick up the story up back in John, skipped a few verses down to John chapter 9, verse 24. It says, a second time, they have already questioned this guy once. So a second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth. They said, we know this man is a sinner. The man that had healed this blind man is a sinner, they said. See, by now, this man who had been born blind had heard the same question over and over and over again. He did not know why he was healed. He didn't even know what Jesus looked like, because when he left Jesus, he literally had mud in his blind eyes. So what happened? What was his answer to these religious people? Well, John 9:25 tells us his answer. He replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. If you were to put that in a good old South Alabama foot paraphrase, he would have said, I can see, deal with it. I can't explain everything. I can see, so you're just going to have to deal with this. See, that's the lesson. The next lesson, the next thing we can learn from this man is he said, I don't know how Jesus did it, but I know he did it. See, this man who was born blind stated that he only knew one thing about the one who healed him. He said, I don't know anything about the man. I don't know where he came from. I don't know what he looks like. I don't know if he is a horrible sinner or a wonderful saint. Before I met that man, I could not see, and now I can see. That's all I know. That's everything I know. There's nothing else for me to tell you. That's it. You see, people may question you and your faith. People may question why you believe what you believe. They may have all these answers, all these questions for you, and I want to give you a little relief right now. You don't need all the answers to tell people about Jesus. See, these religious people, they were trying to trick this former blind man into implicating that Jesus was a sinner and had done something very wrong. And the former blind man, he was not taking their bait. Listen, he said, one thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. That's all I know. I don't know anything else. I just know that. The blind man was saying that the only information he could share with anybody is what Jesus had done to change his life. That's all he knew for sure. I was blind, but now I can see. He said, that's the one thing I know. You know, we need to follow what this blind man did. We need to follow what this former blind man did. All we're supposed to do as a Christ follower is to tell people what Jesus has done for us. You don't have to be a biblical scholar. You don't have to have a degree in theology. You don't have to be trained in Christian apologetics. The basic thing that people want to know is, what did Jesus do to change your life, and why do you love him so much? That's it. If you're listening right now and you're a Christ follower, I want you to know that's the only thing that we have to tell people about Jesus that people really want to hear about. What has Jesus done in our lives? See, all you need to do is tell people that. Tell people about Jesus. And all you do to tell others about Jesus is to tell them your story and then trust God to use your words to help those who you are talking to begin to understand that God loves them just like He loves you. Warts, scars, wounds, and all. See, the truth is, and I've learned this in my life as a Christ follower, the truth is this. You can always find someone who wants to argue with you or debate with you about your faith. It's not hard to find. The vast majority of the time, those people that want to argue with you or debate with you, they don't have any desire to become a Christ follower. Most, if not all of the time, they just want to try to win an argument. Now listen, I'm going to confess to you, I've said this in many services, I like to debate. It's fun to me. I enjoy debating. I like to defend my faith. I love doing that. I don't have a problem doing that at all. I mean, you know, my basic thing is you want to argue about it or debate about it, bring it. I'm ready. I might not have all the answers, but you're not going to change my mind, and I'll try my best to change yours. I love to do that. I've gotten into so many different debates and arguments about the truth of the Bible, about the existence of God, about whether or not Jesus really died for people. The list goes on and on and on of the things that I have debated about. But in all these times I've been in a debate, and all these times somebody's tried to argue with me or tried to back me into a corner or tried to trap me by asking me questions. Do you know what I found out? There's something that I have never done in every one of those arguments. I have never argued anyone into a relationship with Jesus Christ. I have never debated anyone into a relationship with Jesus. You see, what I have done is I have shared how Jesus changed my life. And I've shared that He loves that person and that what He did for me, He will also do for them. And honestly, that's the most convincing evidence that you can present about Jesus. What has He done for you? How has He changed your life? Why do you love Him so much? We need to come to this truth. We need to understand this. And this is the next lesson we can learn is this. The truth is some will still choose to not believe in Jesus. Unfortunately, that's a reality. See, the former blind man, he had just answered the second round of questions from the religious leader, and they were not satisfied with his answers. And so they interrogated this former blind man even more. And we pick up the story in John 9. John continues the story. It says in John 9:26, then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? The man answered, he said, I've told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become His disciples too? Now, I love the boldness of this blind man, this former blind man. See, the former blind man, he must have thought that the reason these religious leaders were so interested in knowing more about the man who healed him, that they must want to become one of his disciples. So he just comes out and asks them. I mean, he must have figured, why else would they be so insistent about knowing who Jesus was? And that question from this former blind man, I love it. That question did not go over well with these religious people. John tells us what happened in John 9:28. He said, then they hurled insults at him. Okay, they couldn't make him say things that they didn't want him to say, so they hurled insults at him, and they said, you are this fellow's disciple. We're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. Listen, don't miss this. These religious leaders refused to believe in Jesus even while literally staring into the eyes of overwhelming evidence. See, this former blind man, he had been in this community his whole life. And most likely, all of those religious people had been in the same community their whole life. Most likely, they had walked past him as he was begging. He was a blind man. He could not do any work. All he could do was beg and depend on the charity of other people. So he begged, and that was his job, to try to get money, to try to get help. And most likely, these Pharisees, these religious people, had walked past him many, many times. His family lived in that community. This man was known, he was a known beggar in the community. And one day, he went out to beg and was still blind. And John tells us that on that same day, the man came home seeing. John gives us further proof that the man was born blind. And other people knew about this. In John 9:8, we can go back to that verse. He says, his neighbors, the former blind man's neighbors, his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? They were having trouble believing that a guy that they had seen for years, blind and begging, was now seeing. We know based on John's eyewitness account that the religious leaders questioned the man multiple times, and they also questioned his parents to confirm that the man had been born blind. These religious leaders, they simply wanted to argue. They did not have any desire to believe in Jesus. Our former blind man was amazed at their rejection of Jesus, and he doesn't hold back. I love his boldness. He's a brand new believer. I mean, he still has the new Christ follower smell on him. I mean, he's brand new. And John tells us how he answered these religious people. In John 9, verse 30, down through verse 33, John writes, the man answered, now that is remarkable. He said, you don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. This former blind man challenges the religious leaders who should know better. He challenges them to correct their theology. He tells them that only God could heal like he had been healed. And it is the religious leaders who were the blind ones, and they were blind by choice. They chose not to acknowledge Jesus. See, instead of listening to the man and hearing the truth and what he was saying, they had a totally different reaction, and John records their reaction. John 9:34 says, to this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. They kicked him out of the synagogue. And another lesson we can get from this blind man is we need to understand that our faith is going to be tested. Let's go back to the blind man for just a minute. This former blind man's faith was severely tested by these religious people who should know better. You see, they questioned his character by asking him if he had really been born blind. Are you sure you were blind? I mean, really? You sure you weren't faking it? These religious people didn't believe him, so they called on his parents to ask if he had been born blind. He says he was born blind, but you're his parents. Was he really born blind? I mean, is that true? Go back and read in John. He says, he's a grown man, ask him. That's what they said. Well, it's a paraphrase, but that's what they said. They said he can speak for himself. These religious people, they challenged the former blind man's integrity by trying to get him to say something that was not true when they were trying to get him to say that Jesus was a sinner. And finally, they cursed this man and they kicked him out of the synagogue. We might not think, well, what's the big deal? He can just go find another synagogue. It's not that simple in Jesus' day. See, the synagogue, this is very significant because the synagogue was the center of Jewish culture and life in the time of Jesus. Everything revolved around the synagogue. And he was told he couldn't come back. They kicked him out. See, this former blind man was brand new in trusting Jesus, and this was all happening on his first day as a healed man. Listen, no matter if you accept Christ as your Savior today or if you have been a Christ follower for a long time, I want you to know one day your faith is going to be tested. People may ask you questions you don't know the answer to. Happened to me. People may try to get you to doubt your salvation. That's happened to me. People may try to convince you that what you believe is wrong. People may challenge you to deny Jesus. People may question your intellect for believing in something you can't fully explain, or believing in someone, believing in God that you can't fully explain. Spoiler alert, let me help you out. No one can fully explain God, because if you or I could fully explain God, then He would not be God. People may ridicule you. People may persecute you in other ways. People may reject you because you follow Jesus. Your friends may turn away from you. You need to understand, and I need to understand, that when our faith is being challenged, we need to remember this nameless former blind man and stand firm. See, even though his faith was brand new, the former blind man was already growing stronger in his faith. No matter what challenges he faced, he never backed down from his faith. He never wavered when people were asking him questions he didn't know the answer to. He simply said, I don't know. I don't know. I'll tell you what I know. I can't tell you what I don't know. This man, he was consistent in his faith and in his actions. His story never changed. He didn't care what other people thought about him or about his newfound faith. It didn't bother him what other people thought. He didn't care. He did not care if people rejected him. All this former blind man cared about was standing firm in his faith and telling people what Jesus had done in his life. It didn't bother him if they didn't believe him. It didn't bother him if they had a different opinion. It didn't bother him if they, thought a different way or rejected him. None of that bothered him. He said, this one thing I know, I was blind, but now I can see. That's all I can tell you. So I want to ask you a question. How is your faith right now? You know, it's been said many times that we're living in difficult days. Matter of fact, you hear it on the news every day if you choose to watch it. You may think that very same thing. I've thought it a lot. We're living in difficult days. I was on a Zoom call this week with our bishop and some other pastors, and we were looking at the challenges that we're facing right now in our world. Challenges as a people, and challenges as leaders, as pastors in churches. What are we going to do when this is all over? What's going to happen when we start coming back together as a group and meeting in person? Where are we going as a people right now? And as we were looking at some of these challenges, there are many things that we talked about and heard about during those calls that were very troubling. Since the stay-at-home orders and social distancing has been in place, here's some startling things. Alcohol sales are up 40%. As pastors, we're concerned about addiction being on the rise and how we can help those folks. It's been reported that child abuse has increased. I've heard that domestic abuse has increased. I've heard about depression and other mental health challenges that are on the rise. I've even heard of some suicides that have been attributed to the pandemic. With all the job losses and with all the business closings and the time, people being laid off and hours being cut, people are coming under great financial strain. And the list could go on and on and on. So right now, in the day in which we're living, in this moment, it's very important for us to ask some very serious questions. And I want you to answer this question for yourself. This question has been presented to us pastors, and I'm answering it for me. I want you to answer it for you. My question is this: how is it with your soul? How are you doing in your walk of faith? Are you struggling right now? Are you fearful? Are doubts rising up in your mind? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling attacked? Are you feeling weak? How is it with your soul? I know right now some of you are feeling overwhelmed with all that's going on in your life. And I know that times can seem hopeless and you don't know what direction that you need to take. Right now, it may seem like your darkest time. I'm reminded of another dark time. I'm reminded of a dark Friday that happened one time. Jesus had been arrested. And on that Friday, he went through 6 different trials, all on trumped-up charges. He was stripped naked and he was beaten to the point that it would have been almost impossible for his own mother to recognize him. He had a crown of thorns placed hard upon his head. He was slapped and beaten some more. He was forced to carry his own cross to his own execution. His arms, when he got to the place where they were going to hang him on the cross, his arms were stretched out to the point that his shoulders were dislocated and nails were placed through his wrists and through his feet. He was mocked and ridiculed and spit on. And on that Friday, he died on that cross and was placed in a borrowed tomb. On that Friday, it all seemed hopeless. That Friday was actually the darkest day in history. That was on Friday. But Sunday was on the way. See, on the Sunday after that Friday, Jesus gave us the greatest hope that we could ever have. He rose up from the dead, and he gave us proof that our darkest day does not define us, and it cannot defeat us. Jesus had to go through Friday in order to get to Sunday. And while we're not facing being crucified, so many of us are facing some very difficult times, and our faith is being tried. And for many people, we're feeling like right now we're going through our own dark Friday. The good news is that Sunday is coming. Do you remember David in the Old Testament? David wrote Psalm 23. And one of my favorite verses in Psalm 23 is verse 4. It says, even though I walk through the darkest valley. In the King James, it says, even though I go through the valley of the shadow of death. Even I go through this dark valley. He said, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Oh, no matter what our dark day is, we're not alone. See, Jesus is very aware of our pain. We have hope because of Jesus Christ, and we can look forward knowing that these hard times are not going to last because we can lean on Jesus, knowing that He will not let us down and He will not leave us. As a matter of fact, just like the psalmist said, he said, even though I go through this dark valley, he says, I know you are with me. See, Jesus had to go through his darkest Friday without anyone. The good news for us is that we can get through our darkest Friday, our darkest day, with the assurance that we are not alone because Jesus is going through this time with us. We will get to Sunday. We will get to our victory. We will get past this dark time into a time of ultimate victory. Former blind man spent his whole life in darkness until he met Jesus. And after meeting Jesus, he boldly proclaimed, one thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. What's blinding you right now? Are you willing to release your fears and anxiety and stress and worries or whatever is overwhelming you right now and put your trust in Jesus? He is our best help to get us through these times. Listen, if Jesus can overcome the grave, then He can help us overcome our pain. See, I believe that now more than ever, the choice we make about Jesus is vital to our spiritual, mental, and emotional and physical health. I want to ask you, will you choose to trust in Jesus? With all the uncertainty and fears and doubts and trials, will you choose to lean on Jesus and know that when we are at our weakest, we're taught from the Word of God that Jesus is at His strongest. It may seem like the darkest of Fridays, but friend, know this, Sunday is coming. Will you pray with me? Lord, there's a lot of hurting people around right now. There are a lot of folks who are going through some really difficult and dark times. And right now, it may seem that the darkness is overwhelming them. And that darkness is so pervasive that it is blinding them. God, I pray that they would see the light of Jesus' love for them. Maybe that's who you are right now. Maybe you want to spend a little time right now in prayer and give your life to Jesus. If that's who you are and you want to give your heart and your life to Jesus right now and come out of that darkness that you're in and into the light, I want to help you do that. Simply repeat this prayer in your own words after me. You can remember this prayer with 4 simple words. And if you want to begin a relationship with Jesus and come out of the darkness and into the light, then just pray this prayer. The first word is sorry. God, I'm sorry for what I've done wrong. I'm sorry for the sin in my life. I'm sorry that I have rejected you up to this point in my life, and I've chosen to live in darkness. Next word is please. Please forgive me of my sins. Please come into my life and save me. Please become the Lord of my life. please bring me into the light. And the last two words are thank you. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for shining your light of your love on me and bringing me out of my darkness. Father, for those who have prayed that prayer for the first time today and meant it, I pray that you would just work in their life and in their hearts. Help them to grow closer to you and help them to lean more on you. For others, Father, they may already be Christ followers, or they may be struggling with something in their life. They're feeling like the darkness is overwhelming them. I pray right now that they would come into the light, Father, the light of your love and your mercy and your grace. Remind them again that even though they're going through a dark time, that you are with them and you can show them the way through this because you're walking with them. Oh, it may be dark. It may be a dark day, a dark Friday for us right now. But thank God Sunday is coming. Thank God for our hope and our help in you. In your name we pray.